Marcus had lived alone in the forest for 7 years. His cabin stood at the edge of civilization, where the dirt road ended and the wilderness began. He cut timber, sold firewood, and spoke to no one unless absolutely necessary. The silence suited him. It was easier than explaining why a man of 35 had chosen to disappear from the world. The storm arrived on a Tuesday evening in late October. Marcus was splitting logs when he noticed the sky turning the color of a bruise. The wind picked up, carrying the scent of rain and something else, desperation. He buried his axe in the chopping block and headed inside, but before he could close the door, he heard it. A voice, thin and breaking, calling out from somewhere beyond the tree line. He grabbed his lantern and stepped into the gathering darkness. The voice came again, clearer now. A woman. Marcus pushed through the undergrowth, his boots sinking into soft earth. The first drops of rain hit his face as he found them. She was collapsed against a birch tree, 3 children huddled around her like frightened animals. The oldest couldn't have been more than 10, the youngest still small enough to be carried. Their clothes were soaked through, their faces pale with cold and exhaustion. The woman looked up at Marcus with eyes that held no hope, only the empty acceptance of someone who had reached the end of her endurance. "Please," she whispered. The word was barely audible over the rising wind. Marcus didn't ask questions. He scooped up the smallest child, a girl with matted blonde hair, and gestured for the others to follow. The woman tried to stand but her legs buckled. Without hesitation, Marcus handed the little girl to the older boy and lifted the woman into his arms. She weighed almost nothing. The journey back to the cabin took 10 minutes but felt like an hour. Rain lashed at them sideways. Thunder cracked overhead like the world splitting open. The middle child, another girl, was crying quietly, her hand gripped tight in her brother's. Marcus kicked open his cabin door and carried them all inside, into the warmth and light he'd been hoarding for himself all these years. He set the woman down on his bed, the only bed, and immediately started a fire in the stone hearth. The children stood in a tight cluster, dripping water onto his floor, their eyes wide and watching. Marcus found every blanket he owned and wrapped them up, then put water on to boil. The woman's eyes had closed. Her breathing was shallow and rapid. "What's your name?" Marcus asked the oldest boy, keeping his voice gentle. "Samuel," the boy answered. His jaw was set, trying to be brave. "That's my mama, Ruth. My sisters are Anna and little Grace. I'm Marcus. You're safe now." He said it with more certainty than he felt. The night deepened around them. Marcus made hot broth from the venison he'd been saving and watched as the children drank it down with shaking hands. Samuel wouldn't eat until his sisters had finished. That told Marcus something about the boy, about all of them. They'd been taking care of each other for a long time. Ruth woke once, just before midnight. Her eyes found Marcus across the room and she mouthed 2 words, "Thank you." Then she slipped back into sleep. Marcus sat in his chair by the fire, listening to the storm rage outside and the quiet breathing of 4 strangers inside his home. He should have felt invaded, overwhelmed, angry at the disruption to his carefully constructed solitude. Instead, for the first time in 7 years, the silence didn't feel quite so heavy. The cabin didn't feel quite so empty. And Marcus realized with something like fear that he didn't want them to leave when morning came. Dawn broke gray and cold. Marcus hadn't slept. He'd spent the night keeping the fire fed and watching over his unexpected guests, his mind racing with questions he wasn't sure he wanted answered. When Ruth finally opened her eyes, the morning light revealed what the darkness had hidden, the deep hollows beneath her cheekbones, the purple shadows under her eyes, the way her skin seemed stretched too thin over her bones. She sat up slowly, wincing with each movement. Her gaze traveled around the cabin, taking in the rough-hewn furniture, the tools hanging on the walls, the children sleeping in a nest of blankets by the hearth. When her eyes finally met Marcus's, he saw something break inside her, the last wall holding back the truth. "We've been walking for 6 days, she said quietly, her voice raw. "My husband died 3 months ago. Pneumonia. We lost the farm to the bank 2 weeks later. I had a sister in Millbrook, thought we could make it there, but I got turned around in the woods yesterday morning. By afternoon, I knew we were lost." Marcus poured her coffee from the pot he'd kept warm. She wrapped her hands around the cup like it was precious. "Millbrook is 40 miles east. You were heading north." Ruth closed her eyes. A single tear tracked down her cheek. "I failed them. I got us lost and nearly killed my babies in the woods." "You kept them alive." Marcus's voice was firm. "You kept walking when most people would have laid down and quit. That's not failure." Samuel stirred, his eyes opening instantly, alert to any danger. When he saw his mother awake and talking to Marcus, his thin shoulders relaxed slightly. The movement woke his sisters. Soon all three children were sitting up, looking between the adults with uncertainty. Marcus cooked breakfast, eggs, bacon, bread toasted over the fire. It was more food than he usually prepared in a week. The children ate like they hadn't seen a proper meal in months, which, Marcus suspected, they probably hadn't. Ruth picked at her food, but he noticed she made sure each child had seconds before taking anything more herself. After breakfast, Marcus examined Ruth more carefully. Her ankle was badly swollen, twisted on some root or rock during their desperate flight through the forest. She had a fever, her forehead hot to the touch. Anna had a deep cough that rattled in her small chest. All of them needed rest, food, and time to heal. "You can stay until you're strong enough to travel," Marcus heard himself say. "There's a town 3 miles south. I can take you there when you're ready. They'll have a doctor, help you get to Millbrook." Relief flooded Ruth's face, followed immediately by something darker, shame. "We don't have money. I can't pay you for your kindness." "I'm not asking for payment." "Then let me work. I can cook, clean, mend. The children can help with chores. We won't be a burden." Marcus wanted to argue, but he recognized pride when he saw it. Ruth needed to feel useful, needed to give something back. He understood that better than she knew. "All right. But today, you rest. That's the first job." The day passed quietly. Marcus went out to check his traps and came back with 2 rabbits. Samuel followed him everywhere, watching how he skinned the game, prepared the meat, stored the pelts. The boy absorbed information like parched earth soaking up rain. Anna helped her mother fold blankets, her cough slightly better in the warm, dry air. Little Grace discovered Marcus's small collection of carved wooden animals and played with them by the fire, creating elaborate stories in her high, sweet voice. That evening, as Marcus prepared dinner, he caught himself listening to the sounds of life filling his cabin: Ruth's gentle humming, the children's soft conversation, the crackle of the fire. It felt dangerous, this comfort. He'd chosen isolation for a reason. Getting attached to people meant vulnerability, and vulnerability meant pain. He'd learned that lesson the hard way. But when Grace tugged on his sleeve and asked him to play with her wooden animals, he found himself sitting on the floor, making bare sounds and watching her face light up with laughter. Samuel sat nearby, studying Marcus with thoughtful eyes that seemed too old for a 10-year-old boy. "Why do you live alone?" Samuel asked suddenly. Marcus hesitated. Ruth looked up from her mending, concern crossing her face. "Samuel, that's not polite." "It's all right." Marcus set down the wooden rabbit Grace had handed him. "Sometimes people need quiet. Sometimes the world gets too loud, too complicated. Out here, things are simple." Samuel nodded slowly, as if he understood more than Marcus had said. "Is it lonely?" The question hit harder than Marcus expected. He looked around his cabin, at this makeshift family that had appeared out of the storm, bringing noise and need and complicated feelings he'd tried to bury. "Sometimes," he admitted. "Yeah, it's lonely." That night, Marcus lay in his bedroll on the floor while Ruth and the children slept in his bed. Through the darkness, he heard Ruth crying softly, muffling the sound in her pillow so the children wouldn't hear. He pretended to sleep and let her have her grief in private. Tomorrow, he thought. Tomorrow he'd take them to town, help them get situated, and return to his quiet, simple, lonely life. But even as he thought it, Marcus knew something had already changed. The storm had brought more than rain to his door. It had brought a choice he wasn't sure he was ready to make. 3 days became a week. Ruth's ankle healed slowly, and Anna's cough worsened before it got better. Marcus told himself he was simply being practical, they couldn't travel in this condition. But the truth was more complicated, and it sat heavy in his chest each morning when he woke to the smell of Ruth's cooking and the sound of the children's voices. Samuel had taken to following Marcus everywhere. The boy had a natural instinct for the woods, learning quickly how to read tracks, identify edible plants, and move quietly through the underbrush. Marcus found himself teaching without meaning to, showing Samuel things he'd learned over years of solitary living. The boy never complained, never whined about the cold or the work. He just watched, learned, and helped however he could. Anna was quieter, more reserved. She spent her days helping her mother with tasks inside the cabin, but Marcus noticed how she watched him too, studying him, weighing him, trying to figure out if he could be trusted. She had her mother's cautious eyes, old beyond her 7 years. Grace, at 4, had no such reservations. She'd decided Marcus was hers, following him around the cabin, chattering endlessly about everything and nothing, slipping her tiny hand into his calloused one whenever they walked together. On the 8th morning, Marcus woke to find Ruth standing by the window, fully dressed, testing her weight on her injured ankle. The swelling had gone down considerably. Anna's cough had faded to an occasional clearing of her throat. They were ready to travel. Marcus's stomach tightened. "I'll hitch up the cart. We can leave after breakfast." Ruth turned to him, and he saw the conflict in her face. "Marcus, I need to be honest with you about something. My sister in Millbrook, I haven't heard from her in over a year. I don't know if she's even still there. I don't know if she'll take us in if she is." Her voice dropped to a whisper. "I have nothing. No money, no home, no prospects. Taking us to town doesn't solve anything. It just moves the problem somewhere else." Marcus busied himself with stoking the fire, avoiding her eyes. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying I don't know what to do." The desperation in her voice made him look up. "I can find work in town, maybe. Washing, cooking, cleaning. But who's going to hire a widow with 3 children? Who's going to rent to us? And winter is coming. If we don't find something soon," she couldn't finish the sentence. The children were still sleeping. In the gray morning light, Ruth looked fragile and fierce at the same time, a mother facing an impossible situation with no good options. Marcus had seen that look before, years ago, on another woman's face. The memory made his chest ache. "You could stay here," he said before he could stop himself. Ruth stared at him. "What?" "Stay. Through the winter, at least. I've got room, and the cabin's warm. You said you could cook and mend, I could use the help. Samuel's good in the woods. He could learn to trap, help with the timber work. It's practical. Makes sense." "Marcus, we can't impose on you like that." "It's not imposing if I'm offering. People will talk. A widow and her children living with an unmarried man. There are no people out here. That's the point." Marcus moved to the stove, started preparing breakfast with hands that shook slightly. "Look, I'm not good at this, at talking about feelings or making grand gestures. But I've been alone a long time, and maybe I don't need to be anymore. And you need a place. Your kids need stability. We can help each other. That's all I'm saying." Ruth was silent for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was thick with emotion. "Why are you doing this? You don't owe us anything." Marcus thought about the question. He thought about the woman he'd loved and lost 7 years ago, about the baby that never drew breath, about how he'd run to these woods to escape the pain and had only succeeded in preserving it. He thought about Samuel's steady gaze, Anna's careful trust beginning to bloom, Grace's hand in his. He thought about how his cabin had felt empty for 7 years and had only felt like a home in the past 8 days. "Maybe I'm tired of running," he said finally. "Maybe I'm ready to try something different." Before Ruth could respond, Grace padded out of the bedroom, rubbing her eyes. She went straight to Marcus and wrapped her arms around his leg. "Are you making pancakes? Mama said you might make pancakes today." Marcus looked down at the little girl, then up at Ruth, then at Samuel and Anna, who had woken and were watching from the doorway. 4 pairs of eyes, for lives that had crashed into his solitude like a storm. Saving them, he realized, might be the same thing as saving himself. "Yeah," he said, his voice rough. "I'm making pancakes." Ruth's eyes filled with tears. She nodded once, a decision made. "Then I'll help you. And tomorrow, Samuel can help you check the traps. And Anna can start learning to preserve vegetables for winter storage. And we'll figure this out. Together." The word hung in the air like a promise. Together. Marcus had spent 7 years believing he was better off alone. Now, standing in his cabin with a makeshift family gathered around him, he wondered if the opposite might be true. Maybe people weren't meant to carry their pain in isolation. Maybe healing only happened when you let someone else in. "Together," he agreed, and started mixing batter for pancakes while the morning light grew stronger and the cabin filled with the sounds of breakfast and planning and hope. Outside, the first snow of the season began to fall, soft and silent, covering the forest in white. Winter was coming, but for the first time in years, Marcus wasn't facing it alone. Winter descended on the forest with fierce determination. Snow piled high against the cabin walls, and temperatures dropped until the cold was a living thing that pressed against the windows and snuck through every crack. But inside, the cabin glowed with warmth and life. Marcus had expanded his trapping routes, with Samuel learning to run the closer lines. The boy had a gift for it, moving through the snowy woods with increasing confidence. Marcus watched him grow stronger each day, his thin frame filling out with regular meals and hard work. Samuel never spoke much about his father or the farm they'd lost, but sometimes Marcus caught him staring into the fire with old eyes, carrying grief too heavy for his young shoulders. One afternoon, as they checked traps together, Samuel broke his usual silence. "My pa used to say a man's worth was in his work and his word. He said if you kept both honest, you'd be all right in life." The boy paused, adjusting the reset trap. He was honest. Worked himself to death trying to keep the farm. But we lost it anyway. So I don't know if what he said was true. Marcus crouched beside him in the snow. "Your father was right about a man's worth. Being honest and working hard doesn't guarantee success, but it guarantees you can live with yourself. Your pa died with his dignity intact. That means something. Does it mean something that we lost everything? It means life isn't fair. But it doesn't mean you stop trying, stop working, stop being honest. You keep going because that's what strong people do. That's what your pa taught you by example." Samuel nodded slowly, and Marcus saw some of the weight lift from those young shoulders. They finished the trap line in comfortable silence, and when they returned to the cabin with 3 rabbits and a fox pelt, Samuel was smiling. Inside, Ruth had transformed the cabin. Curtains hung at the windows, sewn from fabric Marcus had traded for in town. The meals were elaborate and delicious, nothing like the simple fare he'd survived on for years. She'd organized his chaotic storage system, mended every piece of clothing he owned, and somehow made the rough cabin feel like a real home. More than that, she'd brought laughter and conversation, filling the empty spaces with stories and songs. But Marcus noticed the shadows under her eyes, the way she sometimes stared out the window with a distant, worried expression. One evening, after the children had gone to bed, he found her sitting by the fire, darning socks with trembling hands. "You're exhausted," he said gently. "You don't have to work so hard, Ruth." "I do." Her voice was tight. "You've given us everything, shelter, food, safety. I need to earn our place here. I need to be useful. You're not a servant. He stopped, unsure how to finish. What were they to each other? Not quite family, not exactly friends, something undefined and growing. "I'm terrified," she admitted, her voice breaking. "I'm terrified that one day you'll wake up and realize we're too much trouble, that you want your quiet life back. I'm terrified that I'll fail my children again, that I'm already failing them by accepting charity." "Ruth, stop." Marcus knelt beside her chair, taking the darning from her shaking hands. "This isn't charity. You work harder than anyone I've ever known. Your children are good kids who help without complaining. You've made this place better in every way. If anyone's getting the better end of this arrangement, it's me. You're just being kind. I'm being honest. Before you came, I was existing, not living. I was hiding from the world, calling it peace. You know what real peace is? It's this. It's a cabin full of noise and life and people who need each other." He hesitated, then took her hand. "I'm glad you're here. All of you. I need you to believe that." Ruth's eyes filled with tears. She squeezed his hand, holding on like he was the only solid thing in a shifting world. "Thank you," she whispered. "For everything. For seeing us. For giving us a chance." The moment stretched between them, charged with something neither was ready to name. Marcus pulled back gently, standing up. "Get some rest. I'll bank the fire." As winter deepened, they fell into rhythms. Samuel worked alongside Marcus, learning woodcraft and wilderness survival. Anna helped Ruth with cooking and preserving food, but Marcus also taught her to whittle, and she showed surprising talent for carving. Grace appointed herself the cabin's entertainer, singing songs and putting on elaborate performances that made everyone laugh. On the darkest days of January, when the sun barely rose and the cold was brutal, they stayed inside and told stories. Ruth spoke of her childhood on a farm much like the one she'd lost. Marcus, slowly and carefully, began to share pieces of his past, the wife he'd loved, the baby they'd lost, the way grief had driven him into isolation. The children listened with solemn attention, and Grace crawled into his lap, patting his beard sympathetically. "It's okay to be sad," she said with 4-year-old wisdom. "But you're not alone anymore. You have us now." Marcus held her close, looking around at the faces of this accidental family. Samuel, growing tall and capable. Anna, slowly learning to trust and smile. Grace, pure joy and affection. Ruth, beautiful and strong and tired and hopeful all at once. "Yeah," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "I have you now." They celebrated Christmas with hand-carved gifts and a feast Ruth prepared from their carefully hoarded supplies. Marcus had secretly walked to town weeks earlier and traded pelts for fabric, candy, and a doll for Grace. The children's faces when they opened their presents made every frozen step of that journey worthwhile. That night, after the children slept, Marcus and Ruth sat by the fire. Snow fell outside, and the world was quiet and white and perfect. "I never thought I'd feel this way again," Ruth said softly. "Safe. Like maybe the future isn't just something to survive but something to look forward to." Marcus wanted to tell her that he felt the same way, that she'd brought light back into his darkness, that he was falling for her and had children in ways that both terrified and thrilled him. But the words stuck in his throat, too big and too true. Instead, he said, "Spring will come. We'll plant a garden, maybe expand the cabin. Build a future." Ruth smiled, understanding what he couldn't say. "Yes. We'll build a future. Together." Spring arrived slowly, the snow retreating inch by inch, revealing the brown earth beneath. Marcus stood on his porch watching Samuel teach Anna how to identify the first green shoots pushing through the soil. Grace danced around them, singing a made-up song about flowers and sunshine. Ruth stood beside Marcus, her hand resting gently on his arm, a casual touch that had become natural over the long winter. "Hard to believe it's been 5 months, she said. "Feels like longer. And shorter." Marcus looked at her, this woman who had stumbled into his life during a storm. She looked different now, healthier, with color in her cheeks and light in her eyes. But more than that, she looked at home. Like she belonged here, with him. The winter had changed all of them. Samuel had grown 3 inches and could run a full trap line alone. Anna had come out of her shell, her laughter now a regular sound around the cabin. Grace had never met a stranger and treated Marcus like he'd hung the moon. And Marcus, he'd learned to live again, to hope again, to imagine a future that included other people. But spring brought complications. The snows melting meant the roads were passable. Ruth's sister in Millbrook could be reached now. The question they'd all been avoiding couldn't be postponed any longer. One evening after supper, Ruth sent the children outside to play in the lingering daylight and turned to Marcus with serious eyes. "We need to talk about what happens next." Marcus's chest tightened. "I know. I should write to my sister. See if she's still in Millbrook, if she has room for us. That was always the plan." "Was it?" Marcus kept his voice steady. "Or was that a story you told yourself when you had no other options?" Ruth sat down heavily at the table. "I don't know anymore. I don't know what I'm doing, Marcus. All winter, I've been telling myself this is temporary, that we're only here because we have nowhere else to go. But the truth is," she stopped, her voice catching. "The truth is I don't want to leave. The children are happy here. I'm happy here. But I can't keep taking advantage of your kindness. You've given us so much, and I have nothing to offer in return except more mouths to feed, more responsibility, more complications in your life." Marcus crossed the room and sat across from her. "What if I want the complications?" "You say that now, but..." "Ruth, listen to me. I spent 7 years alone, convinced I was better off that way. Then you showed up with your kids, and everything changed. You made me remember what it feels like to be part of something bigger than myself. You made me want to build instead of just survive. That's not nothing. That's everything." Tears spilled down Ruth's cheeks. "But what are we, Marcus? We're living together, raising children together, but we're not, we're in this strange in-between place, and I don't know what it means or where it's going." Marcus reached across the table and took both her hands in his. His heart hammered against his ribs. This was the moment, the choice that would define everything that came after. "Marry me," he said. Ruth froze, her eyes wide with shock. "I know it's fast. I know we've only known each other a few months. But I also know that I love you. I love your strength and your kindness and the way you've turned my cabin into a home. I love those kids like they're my own. I want to make this permanent, legal, real. I want you to be my wife, and I want to be Samuel's and Anna's and Grace's father. Not just in practice, but in name. In every way that matters." "Marcus," Ruth's voice broke. "Are you sure? Once you do this, you're tied to us forever. You'll have responsibilities, obligations. Your quiet, simple life will be gone." "It's already gone. It's been gone since the moment I found you in the storm. And I don't want it back. I want this. I want you. I want them. I want the noise and the complications and the messy, beautiful life we can build together. So I'm asking, will you marry me?" Ruth was crying openly now, but she was also smiling. "Yes. Yes, 1,000 times yes." Marcus stood and pulled her into his arms, holding her tight while she cried against his chest. Relief and joy flooded through him. This was right. This was what he'd been running toward all along without knowing it. The door burst open and 3 children tumbled inside, Grace in the lead. Why is Mama crying? Did something bad happen? Marcus and Ruth separated, laughing. Marcus crouched down to their level. No, something very good happened. Your Mama and we're getting married. If that's all right with you. Grace shrieked with delight and launched herself at Marcus. Anna's face broke into a wide smile. But Samuel stood still, his expression cautious, evaluating. Does that mean you'll be our pa? Samuel asked quietly. Marcus met the boy's eyes. If you'll have me. I know I can't replace your father, and I won't try. But I'd be honored to be your pa, to take care of you and your sisters and your mama for the rest of my life. Samuel studied him for a long moment. Then he stepped forward and extended his hand. I think my father would have liked you. I think he'd be glad we found you. Marcus shook the boy's hand, man to man, and then pulled him into a hug. Samuel stiffened for a second, then melted against him, his arms wrapping around Marcus's waist. The girls piled on, and Ruth joined them, and for a moment they were a tangle of arms and laughter and tears and joy. They were married 3 weeks later in the small church in town. Marcus wore his only suit, brushed clean and mended by Ruth. She wore a simple dress she'd sewn herself, wildflowers in her hair. The children stood up with them, beaming. The town turned out in force, curious about the hermit woodsman who'd taken in a widow and her children and was now making it official. After the ceremony, as they walked back to the wagon, Samuel tugged on Marcus's sleeve. Pa? The word was tentative, testing. Marcus looked down at the boy, his son now, in every way that mattered. Yeah? Thank you. For saving us. For choosing us. Marcus's throat tightened. You saved me too, son. You all did. I was lost before you came along, just as lost as you were in that storm. We found each other. That's how family works. That night, in the cabin that now housed his wife and children, Marcus lay awake listening to the sounds of his family sleeping around him. Grace snored softly in the loft Samuel and Anna shared. Ruth breathed peacefully beside him, her hand resting on his chest. He thought about the storm that had brought them together, about choices and chances and the strange ways life could change in a single moment. He'd thought he wanted solitude, but what he'd really needed was purpose. A reason to keep going. People to love and protect and build a life with. In the darkness, Ruth's voice whispered, "What are you thinking about? How lucky I am. How 7 years ago I lost everything, and I thought that was the end of the story. But it was just the beginning. It was all leading here, to this moment, to you and the kids. To family." Ruth squeezed his hand. "We're the lucky ones, Marcus. You gave us a home when we had nothing. You gave us hope. You gave us love. We gave each other everything," Marcus corrected. "That's what family does." Outside, a spring rain began to fall, gentle and nourishing, washing away the last traces of winter. And inside the cabin at the edge of the forest, a family slept peacefully, bound together not by blood or obligation but by choice and love and the unshakable knowledge that they belonged to each other, now and forever. The lonely woodsman had taken in a widow and her 3 children, unaware they would become his family forever. But looking back, Marcus realized there was nothing unaware about it. From the moment he'd heard that voice calling out in the storm, from the moment he'd made the choice to go looking instead of staying safe inside, he'd been moving toward this life. Toward them. Toward home. And he wouldn't change a single moment of it.